Welcome back to Games Revealed. I'm James Nels the Brink, and today I want to talk about something that's more for the newer PC gamers out there, the ones that are getting into the whole just gamut, the whole thing of being a PC gamer from maybe consoles or you just new to just gaming, maybe even period. There's a lot, and Steam Deck has been just a great introduction, I think, for some of those, as it will have a little bit more of a console-like feel, especially when you load it up. But with that, I think there's a lot of people that are curious. I'm seeing it on my Discord channel or server, and it's definitely something I want to answer. So let's go through a couple of basics. Let's do this boot camp of just what hardware is in a PC and how it kind of interacts with your games. So let's start off with the CPU. This is one of the most core parts of the PC, but it's not the most important one for gaming. That's a different part that we'll get to next. But the CPU is like the brain of the PC. It allows for high amounts of calculations to allow moving data and just processing applications. Calculating applications. When an application launches, when it does stuff, the CPU helps with that. There are two main types of CPUs, AMD and Intel, brands that is. They create most of what we have out there. That's PC wise. There's obviously some other ones for mobile, but this isn't mobile channel. This is a PC gaming console, whatever it is. I guess I don't even know at this point what it is, but the CPU is really important. This is a core part to get right when picking your build. So if you're going to be building a new PC soon, this one's important. But if you're not, if you're starting out with the Steam Deck, that's fine. But it's still nice to know that, hey, in that Steam Deck, there is a CPU. And with that, there's a lot of guides out there on choosing all these parts. I must preface that, or you just note that there's a lot out there to help build a computer. But it is nice to know what it kind of does, right? And so the CPU will bottleneck things if you don't get the right one. The next item is a GPU. The GPU is what renders the graphics. And that's why I say it's the most important part if you're a PC gamer. Both are important. Like if you skimp out on one or the other, you're just not going to have a good time. But if you really skimp out on your CPU, it could really bottleneck your GPU. But vice versa, if you go too expensive on the CPU, it's just not worth it for people that play PC games. There's a lot of high-end CPUs out there that just aren't worth getting if you're a PC gamer. If you're someone like me, where I program and I do a lot of other various tasks that require multitasking of the CPU, then that's where core count gets involved with the CPU. But that's besides the point. We don't need to go down cores or the architecture on CPUs. Just know that there's a lot of lists out there, and I'll even include a list in the description below of a decent computer that you can get at $800. The GPU, though, it has two different brands or companies that are vying for that top spot, and that is AMD and NVIDIA. So AMD plays in the CPU game and also the GPU game. NVIDIA and Intel want to be in the CPU and GPU game, respective to what the opposite of what they're already in. They struggle. They don't do as good. The GPU has RAM. That's an important part to remembering. Like if you want to play 4K games, you need to have higher amounts of RAM. Typically, if you go with like the 3060, 3070, it might be just good enough to do 4K, but oftentimes you could be limited by some texture sizes. So that's the GPU. And like I said before, if you need to upgrade your PC, let's say if you bought a PC, maybe a store-bought one, you just don't know that much about it. If it's in the past few years and the CPU is good enough, then the GPU is definitely the number one thing you should upgrade. That's typically pretty good advice, I would say. But once again, it all depends on what's in that system. If you already have like a pretty decent GPU from a couple of years ago and you have just an okay CPU, you just might get bottlenecked and might not be worth putting in that GPU. So get on forums, get on our Discord. If you're wanting to upgrade your computer or you want to build a new computer, you can go to our Discord, Games Revealed. I'll have it in the description below, so no fret there. Okay, next up, the next item, RAM. This is also a very important one. It's one that it's typically like the defaults today are about 16 gigs for a good PC gaming rig. you might want to go to 32 gigs if you're multitasking a lot while also playing games. Like if you have a lot of browsers open, or if you're watching stuff and have browsers open, it could help to actually have that 32 gigs. I usually roll with about 32 to 64, but once again, I am doing a lot on my PCs, including streaming and doing all this other stuff. So it just helps. And Chrome, if you run Chrome, it is a beast when it comes to RAM. The minimum I would recommend going is 8 gigs. And that's really like, I really don't recommend that. But if you have to really skimp out, which in today's world, I think 16 gigs is pretty, it's not too expensive. But if you have to go with 8 gigs, then make sure you don't go too expensive on your GPU and CPU, because you'll still get bottlenecked a little bit by that RAM potentially. So RAM, yeah, it stands for random access memory. It's good for caching things, meaning it's limited time, and that's why it's so important. So when you're loading up a game, a lot of assets potentially, and a lot of pieces of the game are going to be loaded into this RAM for short-term access, so that it's really fast, so the CPU can access it and load it and everything. So when your next level loads, or while you're playing that level, the RAM's really important for that. And with that, the next piece is important for getting that storage into the RAM, and that's your storage or your hard drive. There's hard disk drive, and then there's solid state drive, and then there's volatile memory express, which is like an SSD, but like a stick form. And I mean, it is an SSD, but it's in stick form instead of like, looks like a hard drive. And that is important if you want really short load times. Getting like the NVMe SSD is going to be your best bet. Like you're going to get the best loading times with that. And paired with, enough RAM, you shouldn't have any problems. And so with the storage, it's long term. So when you turn the computer off, it doesn't reset the storage. Like with RAM, if you turn the computer off, it clears the RAM. The RAM is only active as long as there's power being supplied to the computer, where storage or the hard drive is a persistent drive, and it will hold it for as long as the drive stays good, right? Or until you delete it off the drive. So, and it can hold a lot more. Like RAM is meant for short or small amounts of data to be accessed quickly. You don't want to, you wouldn't want your computer loading all of its hard drive into it. It just doesn't have enough space. It's expensive. RAM's more expensive than storage. Storage can get into the terabytes while being a lot less than RAM. So that is the two main storage options. There's also a motherboard or a MOBO, and it's what holds all the components together. It's like where it has a CPU socket, it has PCI Express slots where you can slap that video card in there and slap the cords in from your monitor, and it just allows for you to have everything. It's the least and most vital part of the computer. It's typically you can go a little cheaper on the motherboard. Just really try not to go too crappy. Watch out for reviews and stuff like that. But you can usually cheap out on this item a little bit more instead of, and putting that money into like GPU, CPU. But it's still important to get a decent one, and definitely a brand that's respected for. I feel like the brands have gotten better and worse over the years. So just see through reviews, what's the best one. But it's definitely not like, it's really important to keep, because you can't run any of your parts without it. But it's, you can cheap out on it a little bit. The PSU, the power supply, is what powers the whole computer, and will actually determine how healthy your computer is with the energy it supplies. It has voltage regulation, and obviously, it has a lot of different things, but they have ratings to say how clean the energy is, meaning how, and I could be getting some of this wrong ish, in the sense of like, there's a lot of terminologies here. And some of the stuff, it's been a while since I learned it, but like gold or higher is what I typically shoot for the ratings on it, where you're going to have a much cleaner, consistent voltage, where cheaper power supplies could have a much larger range on that, which can actually make the rest of your parts that consume that energy last like a little less, a little, just not as long or a lot shorter, depending on how bad if the power supply is really bad and it shorts out, it could potentially fry all your components. My experience with all this is that the power supply will usually die first, or the storage. So when I have something fail on my computer, it's usually the hard drive or the power supply. Typically, in my experience, the power supply first, especially if you don't go good enough. And that's why I usually go with gold or platinum is usually what I try to go for. Just whatever you can, just don't cheap out on this. Is one of the items where, I mean, if you want really good performance and all that, yeah, you have to stick with good GPUs, CPUs. But this is the only one item that if you really, really go cheap on it, it could ruin the rest of the computer and the whole rest of the experience for you. So this is really important. And let's just hope you don't have a fire because you go with the cheap one. So really recommend. If I remember correctly, I would spend about $70 to $100 on a good PSU. Some of my recommendations might have a little bit cheaper ones, but they're tested, meaning if you're going at this blind, don't spend less than, in my opinion, $70 unless it's from a verified list. So with that, those are the parts that I wanted to recommend today, or like go over. That's what makes up like the PC case. You'll find all those types of parts essentially inside of a Steam Deck. If you're looking at getting, if you're getting a Steam Deck, they might be done differently. Like your CPU and GPU might be an APU where it's combined together on a chip that is then soldered into the motherboard like board that goes inside the Steam Deck that has other things that are soldered on it, including RAM, I believe. Storage is not. Storage is expandable with an NVMe SSD, M.2 slot. And there's a battery in it. It's a little complicated when you're talking about portable PC gaming, but it's pretty much, it stacks up. And so let me know if in the comments below if this helped, if you have any more recommendations, if you know what you're doing when it comes to PC gaming, building. If you have recommendations, shoot it down in the comments below. This is not meant to be a guide on how to build a computer, just how to understand a computer that you might build, or what's going on maybe a little bit more in your Steam Deck. If you get a Steam Deck, maybe we'll make a tutorial on actually building a computer in the future, because there's other things you want to watch out for. Static electricity, which isn't, I don't see people caring about that as much anymore, but really you just want to watch out for a couple of things to just not ruin the experience and ruin your device, including like inputting the CPU into the slot. You could do it wrong and mess up the pins. I've done that. The pins are a little different nowadays. Things are a little different. So depending on when you're building your computer, with what you're building your computer, the experience can be a little different. But with a good tutorial, I believe about anyone could build a computer these days. So with that being said, make sure to comment below because I want to hear. And yeah, check out the Discord channel, Games Revealed, if you have any questions on this. There's a lot of people that have built a lot of computers over the years. I've been one that's built a lot of computers, not as much in the past 2-3 years, because it was really hard to find parts. But thank you guys for watching. Watch my other videos, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out. Later.